Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are joining us from. Hi, my name is Abhijit Bhaduri, and I work as an executive coach. I'm the author of the book Dreamers and Unicorns, which talks about how leadership, talent, and culture are the new growth drivers for organizations. In Dreamers and Unicorns, we actually talk to really interesting people, some of whom are really doing fabulous work and they're doing interesting things with their organizations. And what we are really trying to figure out is in this particular season, the focus is a lot on mental health, which, as you know, is something that we are all grappling with as a byproduct of the pandemic. Therefore, today's guest is also going to talk to you about what she and her organization are doing about well being. And that's really what we are going to talk about today. So, once again, welcome. Hey, Mohana, it's so good to have you. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm so delighted. As you can see, between season one, two, and now three, the Starcast is getting better and better. So delighted to have you join us.
Thank you so much, Abhijit. It's my pleasure to be here this evening with you on a very cold evening, according to me, in Bangalore. And thanks to everyone who's been able to join us here.
Great. So, Mona, tell us first a little bit about about your background, what you've done, what brought you to the place where you are. So, talk to me about your professional journey, and then we'll get on to the other questions as well. And meanwhile, those of us who are joining us in the audience, feel free to ask your questions. We are going to talk about wellness, but before all of that, we need to know who is Mohana and what does she do. So, tell us.
Thanks. Thanks, Abhijit. I think this is a great opportunity, first of all, to be interacting with you. I actually just got back to India last year after a fabulous experience of over 5 years of working with SAP. SAP gave me a wonderful platform to actually go global. I led a couple of interesting global portfolios, including removal of ratings for the organization through early adoption, to define technology expert career paths for the global organization, to work with the CHRO globally of the organization. What more can someone ask from a career journey perspective, which was hopping from one great topic to the other and making a true difference to everybody globally as well in the organization. But more than all of that, I think working with colleagues across different cultures was the most important part of that experience. I think that journey was very significant in my life because it really helped me understand all that education that I put my time and effort into, which was to get a master's in psychology, to then go to TISS in Mumbai to study HR and labor relations, all sort of paid off through those 5-6 years of my life dedicated to the profession itself. I'm from Bangalore, and life is such that sometimes you circle back to where you actually call home. So I had to come back on personal reasons last year. And since then, I've actually been associated with Standard Chartered as the head of HR, specifically for the Bangalore hub, which is well over about 8,000 employees here. I'm, of course, supporting the bank, leading a specific people charter and people agenda, specifically from the services side that supports run the bank. Earlier, when I started my career, again, it was in India, in Bangalore, and I was there for a good period of 7 years with Fidelity Investments. And one of the key aspects that's really landed me in terms of where I am today, the conscious decision I've taken to actually do what I am doing today in HR and continuing that journey, is actually the founding years or foundation years of the first few choices you make of trying everything within the function, right? Within doing recruitment, doing learning, doing whatever you call it. You get that broad base of intensive and extensive, and then you make your choice in terms of what you really want to really invest your time in professionally to contribute back to the space and ecosystem that you're working in. So essentially that's in a nutshell. And I'm really glad to be here and sharing what we're really trying to do to help the people in our organization be a fitter organization at large as well in that ecosystem. Yeah.
Fabulous. Mona, and I remember, I think I first met you when you were working for SAP Labs. Is that correct?
I would reckon that we have an association through that particular organization, Abhijit, definitely.
So good to, this proves you went all over the world and then came back to Bangalore, which is where you started, which is evidence that the earth is indeed round. So this is documentary evidence kind of a thing. But I want to start by sort of looking at the pandemic and
Yeah.
how did it impact you? Talk to me about the time when the pandemic hit. You were here. So, what happened when the lockdown was declared? What did people experience? What did you do? Talk to me about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And thank you for asking me that question, which still remains to be very important and critical in the time that we are living in, Abhijit. The last 2 years have been, very crucial for all of us in our life. If we chose to lean in, I think we learned a lot from it, right? Because it's truly been an equalizer for each one of us. One of the, the key things of being a part of an organization and what we really, when I look back, what we ended up doing was essentially looking at first and foremost paying 100% attention to our people's safety, to get them to a place where they could actually operate very safely, to enable work from home, to enable technology that could really support them and get them to, really feel safe and productive from where they really are. Another important aspect was how could we really rewire everything in terms of policies, everything in terms of benefits, your financial assistance programs? How could all of that be tailored to actually managing COVID? Your insurance is never knew of anything of this kind before. So how do organizations bring in those solutions just in time so that people are actually feeling safe and benefited during this period as well? And that was really our main focus and focal point. And as we were doing all of this, Abhijit, I think when I look back, while we got our people safe, the debates that we had, the fights that we internally had between leaders to take the right decisions for the organization with the minimal resources, which I think happens during any pandemic, was actually so fruitful in taking the right decisions to save people's life and also to keep people very safe in certain spaces such as their homes, etc. Another important thing that I remember is how, irrespective of what you're doing, how much you're trying to catch up, there's always a lag effect, right? And you're trying to do the best for the organization, but every day things are changing. Every day your decisions need to be agile. And thereby, that lag effect was something that each one of us felt. But truly and honestly, what it presented to us in terms of an organizational experience was the opportunity to be servant leaders in the true sense. We were actually providing that service back and serving the human being in the organization for the first time in the real spirit of everything. Today, of course, we are looking at strengthening by vaccination approach. Everyone's getting stronger because we are vaccinated. And imagine we're asking people in the pandemic to actually come back into offices. So what does it really mean? And to be very honest, if you ask me, Mohana, is this like 100% solution? Is this the right methodology? I would hesitate to give that commitment to you, Abhijit. I would say that one thing that pandemic has taught us is how we take decisions in the now, in the present, and could we do that decision at that point in time, which is the right decision to keep people safe. That's all we can do at this stage. But yes, we are coming back. But all in all of that experience that we had of keeping people safe, getting them all the benefits, all of that experience of 2 full years was actually centered around the human being. And that is the spirit and the essence of that experience that happened in these years. Yeah.
So, what were some of the challenges that employees face, during the pandemic? What changed in their life? What was the employee experience like?
Yeah, I mean this is an interesting yet a very complex question, and the reason why I say that is because we were staring at a fairly well-sized organization. It was a problem of scale, which means that it brought multiple generations into the picture, multiple range of issues that would surface, and life context as well that could surface. We were
Talk to
dealing
me a
with
little about some examples of that.
Yeah, sure. So the kind of population that we were looking at, right, is single people, single parents, people with parents, parents with children. You had people who were in small families, which were nuclear, and you had joint families all living for a long number of months together. And therefore, as an organization, we really had to, be ready to cater to all kinds of concerns that might actually surface. And when you look at from an employee perspective, they had policies, they had benefits, etc. They could refer to and fall back upon. But by the time it was wave two, and we know how severe wave two was and how sudden wave two was, I think the fear of the virus was something that became, a common denominator for everybody, Abhijit. Everyone was sitting by then for months working from home. They were remote working, hardly any movement, nothing new in terms of what was happening across board in each one of our lives, irrespective of the organizations that we were working in. What was also unique was, unfortunately, people lost their families overnight. We had quite a few cases. There were also women and children who got far more vulnerable to domestic violence, as we are aware of it. So, in this kind of an environment, one of the interesting things that was surfacing, which talked about the DNA also and the spirit behind it, was what supported people through that terrible time, how your people leaders were talking to you daily, how connected they were trying to be with you, how much of empathy they were showing to that person in a very human centered way, and even having that conversation, giving that flexibility to you to deal with your own issues in life. The other part that I observed was how your teammates, without guilting you and blaming you, were taking on your workload for a large number of weeks and saying, we'll take care of everything. Those are aspects that I think are the intangibles in organization that we must not forget, because we can make 100 policies, but finally it's that daily experience that people actually had with one another that actually helped us get through this pandemic to really where we are. And I believe that that really helped in something very, very important, which almost all organizations are saying today, that they didn't miss their productivity. They largely did well as organizations, right? We are scraping through some profits and losses, but at the end of the day, people did their jobs very well. And that human spirit is what I think stands out very clearly through the pandemic in terms of such terrible experiences, but people know what really they need to be standing up for and show courage. And that was something that I always will remember. And it continues to be the case, Abhijit, because we are going to face a post-vaccination world, and it's going to check our adaptability. So it's not over. The experience of the pandemic is still underway, and we'll have to see how that really pans out as well.
As a HR person, what are some of the skills that you needed to build during this pandemic, which you didn't ever think of using, or you didn't have? Talk to me about that.
I think this is such an important question, because I cannot fall back only on knowledge of HR, changing policies. It takes some other type of skills, right? That is, you need tremendous amount of conviction, value-driven conviction. What does your organization stand for? And truly, this is the test when you apply that skill as well. And when other teams, because nothing can be done without cross-functional association and dependency. So we were not alone. An HR team is not working on this alone. You had property, you had tech, you had variety of leaders. Every day there was crisis management meetings. What you need is very clearly to bring the teams together. Are you able to bring cohesion and collaboration in the midst of a pandemic? And that's truly, I think, the skill of the hour, where I think this function, this profession can actually help drive that thought process together. And apart from that, I think you need a lot of patience. You truly need sympathy and empathy, which should be very well balanced, because your decisions can be very objective, which need to be the case. For months together, I had to put a lid on my heart and say that we're losing people, as is happening in the industry. But how do I stay objective, yet I don't lose myself in the process? So, as a human being itself. So there is that art of balancing that needs to happen. And this profession and these professionals around us actually bring forth that quality for the organization as well.
So, when you look at the workplace which is there, what is We have a question here from Akash Ranjan, who says that what could be the new policy for employees to help them feel safe, though it will be a cost to the company, but will it be supported by management, which will be a focus for companies in future as they lost business during this pandemic? How do you balance that out? Helping employees feel safe, and I don't know, when you say safe, would it
Yeah.
mean um, how could that feeling be generated? You know,
I
what
think
do you think?
safety. So pre-pandemic, there's a whole lot of research which talks about what is it that trouble people, and one of the most common things was financial, needs or financial certainty across the world and even in India. Right? People were afraid they were going to lose their jobs, etc. And then you're straight into the pandemic, and you don't know whether you're going to live. You don't know whether you're going to have a job, and what happens to your financial needs in the context of pandemic. I think the solutions for making someone feel safe has to be holistic, has to be multifold. It cannot be dependent on a single policy, because feeling safe again means differently for different people. It could be psychological safety, it could be safety of a job, it could be financial safety, it could just be safety from an emotional perspective. So you cannot bring it down through a single policy. So have a variety of different things which will take it closer to the employee and make it a little more personal to their life context as well. So try to see how an ecosystem can actually bring in the context of the pandemic and thereon, financial assistance programs. Try to see how best, even if you have headcounts that are going away, where can you actually fulfill them, use their skills somewhere else in the organization, give adequate time to let them go? How can you give them training and awareness so that they feel safer? How can you build the intangibles? I wanted to share this so much in this forum, that programmatic solutions are not enough. You have to look at an ecosystem where communities are mushrooming, people are able to connect with each other in a way that you don't need organizations to do it, and they can self-sustain. So you have to help people understand their own networks, build their own networks to feel that sense of safety, because you're not alone. What this has taught us is that all of us are in it together. We're not alone. So it's a whole host of things that need to come together in order for us to help somebody feel safe in the ambit of an organization.
I also think that one piece which I've talked about in my book, you mentioned the rise of intangibles, but I also think that along with that, yes, it's true that things like the way that the company stood by them. It's a feeling. It's intangible. It's very hard to quantify and say I used to be 5 out of 10, now I'm 7 out of 10. It's hard to sort of measure like that. But I think one of the pieces that I would really certainly talk about is um, the importance of understanding emotions. I think has gone up a lot,
Yeah.
and I would say that emotions like building trust, and because and I was mentioning this in one of the places where I was talking to the employees. I was saying that I think even though the employees who you had before the pandemic struck and you didn't see them for a while in between, even as these people come back, they may look the same, but they are different because they've been shaped by a number of these experiences. So, in some sense, when you think about organizations, we always say digital transformation, which would have taken maybe 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, happened in these 18 months. I also
Yeah.
think that during these 18 months, the mental makeup of people, because of the life experiences or stuff that has happened around, they're different. And I think they've also gone through the transformation, which normally would have taken a decade. I think it's happened in these 18 to 24 months.
Yeah.
Is that a thing that you've also felt?
I think, when I lived in Europe, working in distributed teams was the norm. So there was so many, I keep telling my ex-mentor that I never met people. We had to get the work done because people were in the US, people were in Singapore, and you just work a mechanism out, right? So there was an implicit trust that you had to work in that model. What happened in India, because we're normally seeing each other all the time, right? The culture is mostly fairly high on power distance to a large extent here, a lot more in Asia. And in India, what really happens is that you're used to coming to office. We're also more community driven. So trust is always about, do you know someone? And then you work for longer, and therefore you're more trusted. So all of these things are, of course, things are dramatically changing with the new generations coming in. and there's no way to escape it. It's a good thing in a way, right? We look at it more positively, and that's better for companies. But it certainly pushed us to find trust through distance in the COVID pandemic. So it presented an opportunity to work without meeting each other. And it was a true awakening for some organizations which had never even allowed people to have Skype conversations outside of their building. So you overnight had to orchestrate how you're going to take your calls from home. And in certain sectors, it is hard. You're not allowed to actually work outside because of privacy and data and so many issues. So while the Indian government was trying to actually relax a lot of norms, here were organizations which were actually pushing through and saying, yes, we better do it now or we are in big trouble. So the situation orchestrated itself in such a way that you had to redefine trust for yourself. And people leaders had to change their mindsets. And I don't believe it's completely there yet. It will get there. And today, because of 18 months of actually having done that, people know they can actually work in the hybrid better. They know they can work in a digital environment a lot more effectively as well.
So instead of being only office, instead of being only remote, it's going to be that hybrid model. Is that how you sort of look at it?
I think that would be optimal, Abhijit, primarily because the notion of why we need to come into work has changed, right? We don't need to plug in to see our mails. That's not the purpose of going anymore into offices. And the truth is, for a long time, in many organizations, they have been giving you work from home for at least 1 day or 2 days, etc. So why do I need to spend 2 hours in Bangalore, travel one way, sit in the office to check my mails? The reason why I go is to collaborate, is to innovate, is to actually meet another human being for different purposes, right? For camaraderie and teamwork and to build that trust. But the regular work and the circumstance all of us are in a very dense city, populated city with the kind of infrastructure, it is reasonable to have this methodology of making it hybrid. So it creates flexibility. And another thing which is also emerging, which we're also trying, is just working patterns. I may be a mom who has a child that I have to drop off 9 o'clock one day. Some other day I can log in at 8 o'clock. But am I trusted enough to do my work for that day? Or do I have to sit 9 to 6 only? So the old school ways of actually having very stationary kind of work and work methodologies is certainly evolving, and it will evolve faster and very much get adopted across companies is my feeling. Yeah.
So Krishna Manohar Kisle, she has asked this question about workplace versus workspace, and I think that the answer to that is what you just mentioned. That I think a lot of the norms around why do you need to go to office, I think that's changing, and the social element is why you go to a particular workplace,
Yeah.
and you can do the work in your home or any other workspace that you're in, whether it's co-working. And people are coming up with multiple models. Some people are
Yeah.
working in a sort of hub and spoke model, that you have one setup where people gather together. Some teams need to work like that, and spaces depending on the kind of work that you do, nature of work, rather than everybody universally having to come to one particular workplace.
Sure.
There is also a very interesting question that Ashwin Naik has raised, that how do you build a culture of trust even when you are working remotely? What is the method that enables us to do something like that?
Actually, honestly, there's no straightforward answer to it. One part is the situation forced us to do it, right? So, unfortunately, the situation forced us. Businesses actually have to evolve in that direction of trying different things and working with trust through that change. We didn't have that opportunity across the world because of the pandemic. But I think if you want to completely sustain that trust, I think what happens is you have to find ways where teams, people leaders, those one to many relationship nodes in organizations, is your top management, your people leaders, or anybody who's a champion for a certain topic like an ERG, etc. They need to actually come together to propel trust in the organization, right? Through the ways of new ways of sort of working together itself. They are channels who can actually make working a different way happen positively as well. Now, your meetings, if I'm a people leader and I'm saying you have to come and sit in front of me, only then the meeting is successful. Versus I'm saying you figure it out, even if you're switched off your camera. And I have this experience on a daily basis. If my network is not okay, my leader trusts me and says, yeah, it's okay. I know Mohana is engaged and she'll talk when it's needed. If I miss a meeting, it's okay. So how do you, everything is small. These are the small practices in organizations. You don't need big programmatic solutions. I keep emphasizing that daily practices build the DNA of the culture, and take that opportunity to build trust one step at a time, one opportunity at a time, and understand the change in your own organization and embrace it. The more people leaders or any nodes in the organization, like I mentioned, is resisting the change as it can happen through transformation of hybrid or non-hybrid, you know that that effect is going to the employee as well. So it's about how we are open to change and how we can actually embrace that. Then trust sort of comes through because you're asking others to embrace that change as well through the pandemic. I hope I make sense. Yeah.
You did, and it hopefully also answered the question that Krishna had raised: that how have you worked on skill set, mindset, and tool set? I think sort
Yeah.
of answers that question as well. Um, I wanted to actually sort of double click on one of the things that you mentioned. What is one practice that you did in retrospect in your organization that you think was absolutely unique? It happened and it was effective. And what would you pick if you had to really choose? What would that be?
Yeah, I think just talking about the pandemic itself, Abhijit, like I said earlier, right? It presents you with an opportunity to do a lot of meaningful things. When don't they say don't miss a crisis, right? As an opportunity, so you can actually do a lot of impactful things for people. So having said that, and really looking at why we're here today in terms of well-being for our employees itself, I do want to call out that in the last 3 years, of 3 or 4 years, I've been thinking about this concept of grief, right? And I have realized that we as human beings around the world, we're not equipped to be in another person's grief when they are in grief. Normally, I get told that, and I'll connect it up with what I'm talking about in terms of practice. But just to sort of set the context, when I'm in grief and I'm sharing it with a friend or a family member, they're saying get over it, or they're saying you're strong, it's okay, it's not a big deal, you'll move on. So how come we are not taught to be in another person's grief? So using that, for me, it was about translating and making a solution in the pandemic where there was so much grief, especially in wave two. And what we did is we brought about an so-called, a channel of support called grief sharing group sessions, where it was the foundation was, a community setup where people just came in every week and they shared their grief. And it was very interesting and it was different and very powerful, if I may say that, because many didn't talk. But at the end of the session, you'll always observe people saying, oh, okay, I didn't know what to expect, but I'm glad I came because I got to listen to everyone else and I realized I'm not alone. And I realized their life is worse off than mine, unfortunately. And it started sort of getting people to repeat and come to these sessions. And more people started coming for these sessions, where we realized in organizations, you don't need to be told. People just want to listen, just want to share. Now, the other thing we did is we took that and we said, what about our leaders who are shouldering all the decisions, who are keeping a very strong face? What happens to them? So I actually got the grief sharing sessions designed for our leaders and our management teams, where we did two things. We made them talk about their grief because they were not only having their own personal pain, but day and night they're listening to their people who are grieving. So you have an outlet, you have a peer group that's sharing, what they went through. But we also did an interesting thing with them specifically because we said they need hope. They need hope that we go beyond the pandemic. So we did visualization exercises with them to say that, hey, you're taking decisions today for the moment, which is hard, but tomorrow is going to be a better day. So unless you give our leaders hope towards decision making for the future, which is a better one, it could impact them more negatively, right? Because we're all facing the crisis. We're all in the pandemic now. So that was something that we did, which I think we got very, very good positive reactions for, and people were very happy that organizations are doing things like that for them today. So that was one experience for me. It was very heartening as well, and it was based on how we all deal with each other in terms of grief, Abhijit, that I wanted to share.
That's really fairly unique. I don't know too many organizations which actually address grief. And what has been your definition of grief when you say grief? There is one which is about loss. Somebody passes away among your loved ones. There's grief. What other forms of grief did people talk about?
That's such a beautiful question, because when we were talking about it itself, I was wondering, what is grief? It's such a, you come out thinking, wow, I mean, it's, you assume it's going to be death because it was done during the pandemic. But it was just so interesting because people started saying, my people leader didn't give me flexibility, and that made me feel so much grief. So actually the feeling of grief is an outcome, but something else in your life is happening, someone's triggering grief, right? So grief is such a personal experience, you can never standardize it. And it's very difficult to say that it was only linked to death, Abhijit. And that was my learning as well, because I had walked in saying, oh, okay, yes, it's going to be because they lost something. But actually, during a pandemic, grief surfaces very differently. It could be because of death. It could be because it's because of your inability to help someone else who is grieving. That's another beautiful takeaway that I learned from these sessions as well. And the fact that any small thing can trigger you and land you in a sense of deep grief as well. But ultimately, it's like sorrow, right? You're not feeling okay. You're feeling a deep sense of loss. You're feeling a deep sense of dejection, and that's all amounting to what we broadly call as grief.
I think it's very well said, Mona. I did a LinkedIn post which is there on my newsletter, which is about grief, which is the unspoken emotion, because many of us we don't sort of really talk about grief in the public. And my interest in this particular area got triggered by some work. I had the good fortune of talking to two of the experts, Professor George Kohlreiser of IMD Lausanne and Professor Charles Dhanraj, of Denver. When we looked at that, and I spoke to a number of HR leaders about how they were looking at it, the definition of grief is far more broader. So, as you rightly said, that, something that you sort of move from one particular situation to another, there's a transition.
Yeah.
And if during that transition, even though you are transiting to a better place sometimes, you still grieve your old friends, you grieve your old connections, you
Yeah.
grieve the loss of importance and goodwill that you had in the previous place, you do multiple things. So sometimes, even when people move to, let's say, when they change jobs,
Yeah.
they continue to grieve. And it often shows up in things like, when I was in so and so company, we used to do this. And, they say, it was so
Yeah.
nice, because everybody did ABC. It's one form of grief that they are expressing. It could be also because of the opportunities. It could be also because of commitments that could not be kept because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
And grief can therefore take
Yeah.
many forms. So, those of you who are listening in, you can sort of look at this particular piece. If you Google it up with my name, you'll come across the article. I've talked about a lot of details on that and what some of the organizations are doing. We actually have some other questions here. Vivek Thakur wants to know, how do you win the trust of new joinees in this particular pandemic, especially if there is some kind of a salary deduction? And some organizations have had to do that because of the pandemic, that their business models have got you know they've got shaken. So it has resulted in job security for, in some cases. In some cases, they've survived the job cuts, but they've had to take salary cuts. So how do you win back trust in this particular kind of a situation, especially people who are new joinees?
I think if I'm correct in the reference, Airbnb, the CEO of Airbnb, right, last year, no, earlier this year, wrote one of the most amazing email to their
I
employees. And I think each one of us has to spend some time and understand what it meant to receive a letter like that from your CEO. And finally, I think what happened with employees is that they were gracefully told, they were humanly told that the situation is such that they were not doing well as an organization and they had to let go of people, but that they will do it respectfully, that they will do it with the needed amount of care. And I think what I'm trying to say is that leaders take decisions on behalf of a system. We're here in it to drive a business altogether, right? So everybody is human at the end of the day doing their roles and their jobs. But what differentiates one organization from the other is the way we choose to communicate the same thing to the people who have joined us, who have trusted us and actually joined us. And that I think makes a big difference. And even for the people, and I know some examples without quoting names, where salaries were cut or some other benefits were cut, were reinstated when things got a little better this year. And I think it's really about how we sort of handhold people who join us and help them understand that it's not targeted or not personalized, that everyone's journeying through it and we're all taking some sort of cuts, right? It's not just for them. The CEO also had taken a cut or somebody else had taken a cut. So it was by design and it was inevitable. So we have to focus on, and people know they're very empowered these days. They can leave you and go to another organization. So it is very important to stay connected to people, to be authentic and to state the facts. No more are we in an era where we have to say something that is not really the fact. People have access to information, people know, and they want authenticity in organizations. And I think it's very important to sort of strive towards that in companies and state it as it is and do something about it when things get better. And that's the proof of the pudding. When your business gets better, what are you doing to change that policy and reinstate salary or benefits, etc.? And that should be our focus then.
Yeah, so in some sense, keeping the human connection alive during good times and bad, I think that to me is the big takeaway that I sort of look at it. Um,
Yeah.
One last bit before I come to asking you a more personal question, which is, of course, I wanted to ask, what is your view? How does the role of the leader and the role of HR change during a crisis? Does it change from the normal times? I mean, if you contrast it when you look back, what do you see is the thing that the business leader needs to do differently and the HR leader
Yeah.
needs to do differently? What is that?
So I'm going to say a little bit of a controversial thing here. I hope it doesn't get me in trouble. I think you start moving to the side of the employee, right? A lot more. You take the side of the employee and you take decisions for the employees, right? You're normally taking the role of a leader is to balance it between the role of an employee, how best we can get them to do their best in the organization and get the best for the organization. So while you still stand for the organization, you're leaning more towards doing things far faster for the employee and their well-being during a crisis. And during a crisis, none of us said we are HR, we are this function, we are that function. Yes, it tends to happen, but when you just look back, when I look back with my own experience, there were so many things I was looking at. I was questioning property, I was questioning tech, I was asking these questions, they were asking us questions, and not a single day can you go back and say it was just this team that did it. So you merging roles, you are just a leader who's taking decisions that's going beyond just your boundaries, and you're collaborating and you're sharing information. It's very, very essential to ask back the organization important questions during a crisis as well, which normally sometimes you're only giving answers to people who ask you questions. But you're in this kind of a role, you just sort of change hats a little bit, and you're conscious about the hats that you're changing at the end of the day. The pandemic sort of made us do that, to be very frank.
When you look at the description of the organization that you gave, it reminded me of the way, in college when they run college festivals. Everybody comes together. You don't sort of say, oh, you're from this particular stream, you're from that stream. You don't do that. You are actually just simply going across to get this job done, and people don't worry about, this one is senior, junior, this and that. So it really is, in some sense, the ideal organization is able to bring that spirit together in the employees and get that done. So I think that's one of the
Yeah,
takeaways for
yeah.
me. As I said, that I'm going to, we are coming to the end of this conversation, but I want to first talk to you about your personal wellness hacks. What is it that what do you recommend? What do you do personally? Talk to me about that.
So I think Abhijit, I don't recommend anything because I've come to realize it's a very personal thing. Okay, what works for me may not work for anyone else, but I'm happy to share what I've discovered at the end of the day. One important thing is I have realized that human beings are very resilient and we're very powerful beings. And the entire premise of my self care is founded on a belief that I have the Shakti within me and I have the answers also within me. I just have to find the tools to help me get to solving my problems, which creates a sense of well being for myself. So there are two or three things that I do, right? One, I almost regularly have come into a habit of revisiting my values. I have a value checklist. And I think because of so many options, so many things, and so many opportunities we all get, you tend to sometimes you're finding yourself in a confusing situation of what is right, what is wrong, what am I doing, how is that impacting me? And sometimes you end up taking the wrong decisions, which actually were never meant for you. And then I realized that actually going back to my value system, being clear about it, gives me conviction to live my life and gives me a lot of strength, especially through my difficult times. It's come, and all of us have gone through very tough times. I myself have experienced a lot of ups and downs. But being clear about my values and standing up for it, time and again you revisit them. You change that list. That's been super helpful. The second thing is the understated thing of family and friends. I think keeping them close, being there for them, doing things for them as well as them, allowing them to share love and affection also creates a lot of sense of well-being. And relying on tools, right? Meditation last 4 years. Hatha yoga I've been doing forever now. I think our sages knew all these things long back. We are just discovering it now, I guess, thankfully. But one last tip is you can use something called the RAIN model, RAIN, which Master Shi Yang He speaks in his beautiful TED talk. He's a Kung Fu master, and I stumbled upon his TED talk, which was an amazing TED talk and a very popular TED talk. Actually, millions of people have viewed it. And he says, when you're faced with an obstacle, try to observe, which is R for recognize there's a problem, A for accept it, because that's the biggest stumbling block. We will have problems, we need to accept it. I for investigation, that is, what did I do? What were the circumstances that I got myself into this problem? And the last one is N, which is the hardest one. And cultivating that spiritual attitude towards life as we grow is non identification, which I think I don't want to tell you what the definition is. Each one will understand it in their own way. But how do we sort of keep everything at a little bit of a distance? Even when you're successful, how do you stay stable? I think that's the beauty of life if we can achieve that journey. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mohana, for sharing your personal mantra, and I am so glad that we could have this conversation. Thank you so much for joining, and I hope that our listeners and viewers, have also found things of value. And if you have any question, you can still leave it on the under the chat box, and we'll get to answer all your questions. Thank you once again for joining me today, Mohana. Wish you all the very best and see you.